Saturday, 16 May 2020. That's this Saturday if you're listening to the episode as it comes out. We're going to be hosting the Warfork Duel Cup number 3, entitled Going the Social Distance. It will be a charity event and giveaway to benefit the Florence Nightingale Foundation, a great cause, if I do say so myself. We're going to be taking donations all week long and giving it all straight to the charity. We'll be giving away a bunch of Steam keys and some In the Keep merch and everything on the stream, so be sure to tune in. It's going to be fucking awesome. I really can't wait. So, again, that's this Saturday, 16 May 2020, 1300 EDT, 1700 UTC, 1900 CEST. Full details over at inthekeep.com. Welcome to another chapter of In the Keep podcast. I'm your very own prophet of the drowned god, the Motherlode. This show is all about the world of first-person shooters, their legacies, their lineage, and the people who keep that world turning. It is the will of the drowned god Cathala that our communities band together to frag and jib one another into oblivion for all eternity. Here we are, episode 52 of In the Keep podcast, and we have Moleki Srarao on the show this week. It's really been an honor getting to know him, just knowing that he's a fan of our podcast makes me really proud, because he's just one of those unsung heroes that I feel like more people needed to know about what he does and why he does it. So he's a video game translator, which is an interesting niche that we're going to really dig into here. But I could give you the whole speech on the Tower of Babylon and everything, but the point is that this is a really cool guy who does a lot of really important stuff. He has localized so many amazing games like Diabotical, Warsow, Xonotic, Serious Sam. The list goes on, and you can hear him really get into it. But localizing that stuff into Brazilian Portuguese and getting his unique perspective from the part of the world that he's from and the path that he chose in life. And this is something he's passionate about. It's not just a job to him. This is really his profession, and he takes it very seriously. And I absolutely adored every moment that we've gotten to spend together to get you guys this interview. So please devote your ears and attention first to this awesome track by the great and powerful Igrac Simon. Go check him out. I'll be leaving a link in the show notes for you. And pretty soon we'll be in the keep with Moleki Srarao.
I am Trindade Pereira. I am a video game translator, and I'm also 23 years old. I've been in this field for 5 years now, 2.5 years as a voluntary and 2.5 years as a professional. And I have started this journey by translating Arena FPS games, and now I am currently translating indie games. And one day, my goal in life is to work on the AAA industry and localize AAA games. But I know that I'm going to get there someday.
Okay, let's we'll work our way up to that point, but I'd like to kind of take a different approach, because this is not the first time we've recorded together, and let's learn from our past mistakes, or whatever you want to call it, and try to dig into this in a more dynamic way. So I actually first want to start off with what was your childhood like, and how did English first kind of get introduced into your life?
Well, I have been interested in the language since I was 6 years old, basically. But I think a little bit before that, like when I was 5 or something, because that's when I started playing games, and I just got so interested in English. And at school, it was like one subject that I was really good at. Like, if there was one thing that I was good at when I was a kid and a teen, was English. And back then we didn't have games localized into Brazilian Portuguese at the time. Oh yeah, I also forgot to say that I was Brazilian. And so we basically had to figure things out on our own. We would have, dictionaries and stuff. We would look it up to understand what we had to do to play the games back then. And so this was one thing that one of our learning methodologies at the time. We weren't just learning at school. We were also learning by ourselves, playing games and watching movies and stuff with subtitles. You just learn naturally. You don't even think about it. You just do. And so I don't know exactly why the language was so interesting to me. It just clicked. That's what I love. I've been in this world of this foreign language and translation for years now. And so that's basically who I am as a person. Not just a gamer, but someone who really loves languages.
Yeah, I kind of shared that passion, and it more fell into my life than you like, where you kind of got it from an early point. Where for me, it came later on in life. But I think of I can't go too many podcasts without talking about pro wrestling. But this guy Kevin Steen, he's more popular by the name Kevin Owens because that's his ring name in the WWE. But
Mm-hmm.
he was from Quebec and grew up speaking exclusively French and learned to speak English. You mentioned kind of watching English stuff and subtitles and everything. He was watching wrestling, which was primarily syndicated in English, and would learn words by listening to the commentators describe, the movements going on in the ring. Like he'd see guys doing a slam or an elbow lock, and he'd learn the word elbow, like, oh, elbow lock. Okay. And then slowly but surely he became like a fluent English speaker from just watching that. So it's really interesting to me how when you're very young, you can absorb not just languages, but knowledge in general, much more through like osmosis, I think is the word I'm looking for. And you can really adaptively learn as opposed to like trying to learn something. If you get what I'm trying to put together here.
I totally get what you're saying. I mean, when we're kids, we're basically a sponge, and so we absorb so much because we're always curious about everything, and so it's just so much easier to learn stuff, and you don't even think about it. You don't even realize that you're learning, and this happens with us as adults too. But as a kid, I don't know, man. It's just like we observe so much. If you start learning something as a kid, by the time you're an adult, you're just an expert at it. So it's really interesting to me.
Yeah. It's really amazing to me when I do meet an adult who still kind of has that sponginess to their mind, like they're not set in their ways or corrupted by the constraints of what they think is their path or whatever. And when you can really just be open to an experience, and I think that's what kids have over us, is that they can just freely explore an idea or see something without having any preconceived notions blocking them from doing it. So for you, journeying into English was kind of part of your education, and then as you come to adulthood or like later teenage years, anyway, you told me about your Serious Sam project and how you kind of just got into that. Can you tell us a little bit about that for the audience?
Yeah. So basically, when I started out, I think it's going to be better if I talk about my story when I started.
Yeah, please,
with
please.
video game localization, because Serious Sam came after that.
Okay.
It was actually in 2016. But so it goes like this. Back in January 2015, I was browsing the Warsow forums. At the time, I was really interested in Arena FPS, and I still am. Um, And so there was this topic called "Help Us Translate the Game" or something like that. And at the time, I really wanted to help the gaming community in some way, but I didn't know how to create mods and maps and stuff. And so I thought, oh, this can be an opportunity for me to help the developers and maybe get some more people to play the game and stuff. But note, I didn't know anything about translation 5 years ago. Like, I had never translated a game in my life. I've never done this before at the time. So, but I wanted to give it a try still. And so I went there, I applied to the project. Brazilian Portuguese wasn't listed in the project languages, and so I asked them to do it, and they did. And so when I got in the project, we had to create an account on this on the website. I think it was One Sky, the name of the website.
Mhm.
And once you do that, they give you access to the project, and you see the strings. Every string of the game, Warsow, basically it was separated by categories. So files, I mean. So you had the UI file, which had the UI strings. You had the achievement strings as well. And so you get there, and the left column is the English text, and the right column is where you insert your translation.
Mhm.
And by the time, like I said, I didn't know anything, so I'm just going to translate. I'm just going to write all this stuff in Portuguese. And so I did. Obviously, it wasn't professional back then. It was enough to get the job done. The experience that I had with English and with Portuguese as well. I mean, I knew how to write particularly well in Portuguese back then. Now I am really serious about this stuff. And so, the game didn't have a lot of strings to translate. And it was basically a small game localization wise. And so I could finish the whole thing in a day. And then the next day, out of common sense, I decided to review what I had translated. And, I didn't know that this was one of the quality control processes in translation and localization. I just thought, I'm gonna I'm gonna review my own work. I want this to be good. It was just common sense at the time. It was just so natural to me, and so I did. And the next day I went there, reviewed everything, made some changes. You know, based on mistakes, and if something could have sound better, I would go there and change it. And so yeah, I mean, and then there was a game update for the game where they added, all of the languages that were basically done, and so because of that, I could test the game with my translation, fully localized into Brazilian Portuguese, and I remember the feeling of, like, seeing the game in Brazilian Portuguese was very exciting for me. I was like, oh my God, I did all of this. Now, more people will be able to play the game. We're not going to have this language barrier anymore, because unfortunately here in Brazil, the English proficiency level in the population is really low. So basically, most people don't know how to speak or write fluently in English. It's a language that a lot of people struggle with. With gamers, it's easier. I mean, to find people who can speak or write something in English, but it's still a problem. It's not like everyone can speak the language. It's not our second language either. We only have one main language, which is Brazilian Portuguese. And so when you translate a game or a product into a, our native language, or any other language for that matter, you're removing that barrier. Like, that person who doesn't understand English won't have to learn a new language in order to enjoy something, be it a game or a book or a TV series or a movie or even anime. So, having that feeling that you were responsible for making that happen is so satisfying, and that's what I felt, when I did that, and it felt so good, and I was like really in love with translation, and so I decided to study more about it. Just dig deep into this world of localization, and I wanted to do this again. And so I went to the Xonotic forums. I also like Xonotic a lot. Um, this Arena FPS that is very innovative when it comes to weapons. I mean, it has very different weapons, a weapon set compared to other Arena FPS games. So that's the main reason I liked it so much. Even though there weren't a lot of people playing, a lot of Brazilian people playing the game. But still, I went to the official Xonotic forums and I found basically the same topic there. They were asking if people wanted to help them out translating the game into other languages, and so I applied to that too. And but this time was a little bit harder and more time consuming because the game had a lot of text. I mean, more than 8,000 words. And so I couldn't do all of that in a day. I mean, it took me more time. I don't remember how much time it took, honestly, since it was like 5 years ago. But I did, little by little, I translated everything. And so it started with, Warsow and Xonotic. And so I finished that, I tested the game and everything. It's fully localized into Brazilian Portuguese today. I mean, the game version was like 0.6 or 0.7 back then. Now it's 0.8.2, if I'm not mistaken, as of the time of this recording. And so, and then, I wanted to make my own translations. These two translations were official ones. Like you translate the game and they are added officially into the game as updates. But I wanted to translate games that I didn't have that opportunity. Like I would have to do it by myself. I'm basically talking about unofficial translations or fan translations for that matter. I wanted to do those. And so this is where we get to Serious Sam. Because in 2016, I mean, I was really interested in Serious Sam. Basically my first Serious Sam game was Serious Sam 3. So I was pretty late at the party. Because Serious Sam's the first one came out in 2001, if I'm not mistaken. The Serious Sam, the first encounter. And so my first was Serious Sam 3 when it came out in 2011 for PC. And but still, after I played Serious Sam 3 and fell in love with it, I was like, oh, I'm gonna play every fucking Serious Sam game now. And so I did. And unfortunately, none of them are localized into our language, at least officially. There were like 3 Serious Sam games that were fan translated in a website, in a very famous website here called Game Vicio. And so it's a website where it's basically a gaming news website, but there's also a section there where people could submit their own translations of games and stuff, which was really interesting. And it was a voluntary section. People did that for free and still do. I mean, in other websites. Game Vicio stopped doing that in 2012, but I can get to that later. So basically, there were translations for Serious Sam, the first encounter, the second encounter, and also Serious Sam 2. Unfortunately, I didn't have a good experience with those translations. I mean, they weren't very, good for me. There were a lot of weird sounding stuff here and there, a lot of mistranslations. It was just the quality was very questionable. And so I wanted to basically make my own translations for those games. But before I did that, I there was Serious Sam HD, the first encounter, and HD, the second encounter, which were the remastered / remakes of the first two games, released in 2009 and 2010. And there weren't any translations for those games, and not even for Serious Sam 3. And so I decided, I'm going to translate the Serious Sam HD games and Serious Sam 3 since there are no translations for it. And maybe, way down the line, I'm going to translate the classic versions too, from 2001 and 2002.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's what I did. And people, I think it had a very good reception. I mean, all of them had a very good reception from the community, because as soon as I was done translating the the last three games, Serious MHDs and Serious M3, people were, thanking me and congratulating me and say, oh, now I can play this game and, understanding everything when before I couldn't understand a thing. And so I realized the importance of localizing a game, because now people can enjoy it in a way that they couldn't before. And so it made me feel good and useful to the world, making a difference in people's lives. And so I was like, oh, I'm gonna keep doing this. I don't know for how long, but I will. Even though I was doing that for free, I had a lot of free time back then. I mean, well, like 4 years ago or something. It's not really that, So after those three translations, I was like, I'm going to translate the classic versions now. The first encounter, second encounter, and Serious Sam 2. Serious Sam 2, I think it was the last Serious Sam game I've translated. Oh yeah, it was the last. And so I did those two, and people liked it as well. And this is when I was, fan translating stuff. I also did a fan translation for a game called Heroes of Hammerwatch, which is from the same creators of Hammerwatch, and unfortunately it is really outdated today. Back then it didn't have the most of the content that the game has today. The game is still getting updated to this day. And they're still adding more content in DLC, but I have stopped working on that translation. I have stopped updating it because I was interested. I got interested in other stuff, playing other games and in other translation projects. But I have checked the community to see if people were, updating my translation or doing their own, and they're basically doing their own now. So. But I think it started with my work. Another thing that I was really interested was translating mods. I remember that I have translated mods back then for Skyrim, Fallout New Vegas, and also Fallout 4. Very, very basic stuff. Not like, those DLC-sized story mods and stuff, very large ones. It was just something like, unofficial patches and, quality of life changes made to those games, and I found those mods to be really useful. So my goal was basically translate stuff that would be useful to the player and not something of a big scale.
I'm noticing like a trend here where you kind of started off with the arena shooters, which have essentially no dialogue. It's, you're talking about menu items and just directions, simple things. And then over time you work your way into Serious Sam, which is not a dialogue driven game, but has like, the cutscenes and different parts where you're going to have to actually translate some speaking. And then now you're talking about doing mods for games like, Fallout and these more narrative driven games that require you to like get a little bit deeper into the language. Like, you're going to be talking with idioms and metaphor and, actual people speaking in a colloquial way. So I am curious, like, what was the transition like for you? And did you kind of taper it on purpose like that, where you're like, I want to wait until I'm ready to do things that are a little more difficult? Or did you just kind of fall into that naturally?
Well, when it comes to Fallout and Skyrim, I didn't translate any mods that would require me to deal with dialogues.
Oh, so you cheated.
Yeah, I mean,
No,
it
I'm
was
kidding.
pretty basic stuff. I mean, quality of life changes, but no dialogue whatsoever.
Okay.
So I didn't deal with that when I translated mods. But there was also this other game that I've translated called Pharaonic. This was back in 2016, and it was a game made by the same creators of Ziggurats, which is a fucking awesome game, by the way. You should check it out. It's a
First
roguelite.
person roguelite game.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I was one of the translators for Ziggurat too. But basically, Pharaonic had dialogues. it had a shit ton of text. It took me a long time to translate that game, and it was a challenge, something that I had never done before by then. So yeah, I mean, you basically have to adapt speeches and to make it sound natural in your language, and that's really different from translating technical stuff like menus, UIs, and stuff, and item names. You When you translate dialogues, you have to be a little more creative and not make anything sound strange in your language. So basically, this is what when I can explain now what localization is and why it's so important in today's world of adaptation. Basically, when you're localizing a game or anything for that matter, you're basically translating that content in order to make it fit in a region, in a specific region. In my case, I'm translating from English into Brazilian Portuguese. So I'm basically adapting a game's text in order to feel as if that game was made in my country. And in order to do that, you have to look at the English text, analyze the whole context, and then you try to think, oh, how would this sound if it was a Brazilian person talking?
Mm-hmm.
And so, I wish I could give you examples, but since it's another language, it's very hard to do that because I know that a lot of people wouldn't understand.
Well, no, but you can say, you could like verbatim translate it. Like if you were to say exactly word by word into English something from Portuguese, it would sound sometimes kind of like, what? Why did he say that? And or what? That doesn't even make sense. But if you say it maybe a slightly different way, or with it, I think the last time we spoke, we talked about how pronouns can be a challenge as well. You can actually
Yeah.
get into these situations where it's not a direct translation, but it is conveying the same spirit or idea while and getting the idea across while making it feel as if it were being spoken in its native language.
Yeah, I mean, that's basically the whole objective. I mean, you basically adapt in order to sound natural, and when you translate something, you analyze the whole context. You are translating the idea, the meaning behind that context. So even if you're translating, for example, I'm gonna go back to UI stuff basically before we go back to dialogue. When
Mm-hmm.
you're gonna translate, an option or something that is just says, for example, fight. So there's this string, and all it says, it's just fight. You don't know if it's a verb, or if it's a noun, or how you should conjugate that verb, if it's an imperative verb, or if it's an infinitive one. You don't know where it's being used, if it's just for one person, if you're saying that to one person, or if you're saying that to two or more people, because all of those different situations you would have to translate differently depending on the context.
Right.
And it's really important for you to know that you can't just translate stuff directly. Oh, this word means that, and that's all there is to it. But no, you have to know everything. The more information you have about what you're translating, the better it will be, and even more accurate. Sometimes when you don't have enough context, you end up translating things wrong, not because of your fault, but in the professional world, you can ask questions to the developers, and hopefully they will answer and give you the context that you need. We can talk about that later if you want. But when you're translating games voluntarily, well, you have access to the games, and if you're a fan, you know where everything shows up, where every text shows up, and even if you still have questions, you can talk to the developers quite easily. I mean, they're easily accessible. You can just go to Discord and find them there, or the forums and stuff, and they will gladly answer your questions. I mean, this is what I love about this world of Arena first-person shooters and also modding in general. I mean, people are so, they just want to help. They just want to help out and create this community where people, create new experiences and help each other. It's a really friendly community. So it's in our case, for people who fan translate stuff, it's really easy to do that.
You said there were some names that when you translate them into English, they don't sound right, or when you translate them from English to Portuguese or from Japanese to Portuguese.
Most of the time, we don't mess with the names unless they sound, like a curse word or something. So we basically have to adapt the name in order to not sound like that. It happened a few times when I localized video games. There was this one project that there was this character and his name was Hola. And that's basically a funny way of saying dick in Portuguese. And so um, our translation team had to change that, and so we did. We changed the O to I, so it was Hilu, and the last A to an O as well. So it became Hilu instead of Hola, so it didn't sound like that. But there are also other examples from TV series like Star Wars. Movies like Star Wars.
Yeah.
Which has this character named Doku. They adapted a name to Dokkan because Doku means something like "I do anal" in Portuguese. Yeah, and there's also this other example of an anime, really really famous one called Inuyasha, and there's this character called Kagome, and which they changed it. They dropped the K out, so it's just Agome. And the reason was because Kagome sounds something like "I shat myself" in Portuguese, which was really pretty funny. And since the original name didn't have this, it wasn't meant to sound like that in our language. They changed it so it wouldn't. And so these are just few examples of how you have to adapt names when it's necessary. But there are also some historical names which I can't think of an example right now. But there are some historical names that we have different translations for them. Even though they are names, they have their own equivalents in our language as well. So it's not like, oh, it's a proper name, you should just like never translate it. Every case is a different case. We have to analyze the context and everything to see if an adaptation would be desirable. So yeah, I just wanted to make this clear for a lot of people who thinks that we should never touch names. We do touch them when it's necessary.
Before we go any further into the linguistic stuff, I do want to take a moment to kind of like get into your gaming background a little more. So you mentioned several times, and you've shown it through your work, that you're an enthusiast of arena shooters and everything. But like, how did you kind of fall into the arena shooter scene as a young person?
I think it was back in 2013 when I was still in high school at the time, and at the time I really liked to play modern first-person shooters like Call of Duty. I was really interested in those, but and Far Cry as well. But and I don't remember when that happened, but when I watched a video of Quake 3, or it was Quake Live, I don't remember which one. And I was like, man, these games are so fast. I didn't know Quake was that fast. And then I got interested in it. And so at the time, Quake Live, and the first arena shooter that I really started to dig into was Quake Live. And Quake Live at the time was still a browser game. So you needed to create an account and open your internet browser to play the game. And I thought that was really strange. I was like, what the fuck? Why is this game not available on Steam? It wasn't, but they added, like in, I don't know, maybe I don't know when that happened, like 2014, 2015. I don't remember when the game released on Steam, but anyway. And so when I saw, how the game was really fast and, had to make this decisions on the fly, and that it required a lot of strategy as well. It's not just, grab the rocket launcher and shoot the enemy until he dies. It was very fast paced. It still is. I just got so hooked in that level of action, and it was just so much fun. I was like, oh my fucking god, this is better than the shooters that I'm playing right now. And so, when I got interested in arena shooter, I was like, when I see a Call of Duty in front of me, I was like, I don't want to play this anymore. It just now I have high standards for FPS gameplay, multiplayer FPS gameplay. So most of the time I just play arena shooters, and there are some Brazilian people here that play these kinds of games. And so I started with Quake Live, and then I just wanted to play more of them. So I played Quake 3, Quake World using the Easy Quake engine, the Easy Quake Surf Sport. What else? Played Quake Champions as well. Played a lot of Quake Champions, and I played a little bit of Unreal Tournament as well. Unreal Tournament 4, which unfortunately it stopped development. That's a really sad thing because of Fortnite. What else? Well, basically every arena shooter that you can think of. Warsow was one of them. Xonotic, even Master Arena, and also Diabotical. The recently, which is in beta state right now. And Diabotical and Master Arena were two other games that I translated, and I'm still working on them as well, because since they're not finished, they still keep adding more strings to these games, and
Right.
and then when that happens, I go there and update the localization, the translations and stuff, the project. And so these were our two other arena shooters that I'm working on their localization.
So what's the I can imagine there's a bit of a challenge to Master Arena, because like I've spoken back and forth a lot with Jeremy, and he doesn't speak English. Like he speaks French, and then like a lot of the back and forth I have, I can tell he's like, using Google Translate to translate things from French into English to give to me. And that's very, very plain to see. I can pick up on that pretty quickly. In fact, I did an article with him for Quake fans a long time ago where I had to kind of like translate a lot of his French into an English that made some kind of sense while preserving the spirit of what he was trying to say about his game. So I can imagine to some extent that not necessarily the game translation itself, but the communication perhaps might be a bit of a challenge for that game.
It was. What you said about Jeremy, it is totally correct. Although I really understand his situation and stuff. It's just not a language that he's very, experienced with, and it's totally understandable. But well, when I was translating that game from English into Portuguese, I mean, there were some mistakes here and there in the English language, and so I have decided to help with that as well. I said, hey man, I can review, the whole English language of the game if you want to, and I can do that too. And so he allowed me to do that. He's really friendly. I mean, you just talk to him and, hey, you ask him something, he's going to do it for you.
Oh
And
yeah.
so I did that. And I think that, there's also this woman that is, I think it's his girlfriend, I'm not sure, that is basically in charge of the localization of the whole game. So she's, she organizes these spreadsheets for us where we can translate the strings and stuff. And so I think she was the one that reviewed everything first in English, and then I did the second review. But I could be wrong on that. I know that she translated, I think her name is Virginie, if I'm not mistaken. And she translated the game into Spanish as well. And I can see that because in the project, you can see the names of people who are working on each language and stuff.
Mhm.
And so my name is there for Brazilian Portuguese. And so, yeah, that's basically it.
Master Arena is a really interesting example because it's one of those games that it has such an obvious niche and marketability that I can't wait for them to, or hopefully tap into, because I mean, we're getting all these, kind of Quake-like first-person shooters between Warfork and, I mean, Diabotical's the big example with the VQ3 movement and everything. And I feel like Master Arena is right there, just like right on the precipice for those Unreal fans who are just lost with Epic abandoning that project for them. And I was really hoping, and I still do hope, that Master Arena kind of collects on some of those potential players that are looking for that style of gameplay.
Yeah, I mean, well, in my case, I never really got into a real tournament's movement mechanics, and I know
Right.
why a lot of people like them. And I can see that Master Arena is going in that direction. But they are doing some things differently. For one, I've seen that you can bunny hop in Master Arena. Not like in Quake where you have to use the strafe keys to
Right.
change directions in midair. You just basically jump, and keep your speed and keep your momentum.
Right.
And you can also like keep jumping off of walls without even touching the floor. And that's something I was really interested in. When I first saw this game, watching seeing the movement mechanic, I was like, man, this is like even more like UT. This is beyond UT's movement. I mean, they are really
Right.
trying to update it and make it something unique, because this is something that Arena FPS needs today. It needs to innovate. You can't just remake Quake 3 and Unreal Tournament countless times and hope it's a success. So games like Master Arena, I'm really looking forward to seeing this game and the developers succeed and sell lots of copies and stuff and get a bigger audience than the other Arena FPS games that we've been getting these recent years. Like Reflex Arena, for example, which is another one.
Yeah, Reflex is an interesting case.
Yeah, but I understand what you're saying. I mean, I think they are going in the right direction with that. I just
Yeah.
wish the game was a little bit more spread out. More people would know about Master Arena.
They've been taking it slow with the development, but they've just had, I think, their first tournament in quite a long time, and from what I understand, it was quite a success. And hopefully, if they can keep that going, I mean, that's what really gets these games out into the limelight. Especially if you don't have an advertising budget, is tournaments. Like events. You got to see competition in a competitive game, or else it's not really a competitive game. So I think they're to a point now where they can start to really capitalize on that and show it off a bit more. And hopefully, as that happens, they'll garner that audience they're looking for.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
That's great. I mean, I'm all for that.
So you garnered this love for arena first person shooters. You've already, at this point, you've translated Xonotic and Warsow and Serious Sam 1, 2, or First Encounter, Second Encounter 3, and then 2, and a couple of other projects. Then where do you go from there? How do you break into the professional scene?
Yeah, I came into that realization in 2016 or 2017. I was like, man, I fucking love doing this. I want to become a professional at this. I want to make a living out of this. And so, I started creating my own resume and portfolio, and just sending those to a lot of companies. I basically Googled game localization companies that offered this service, and so I made a list and then started sending out my CV and my portfolio to them, and I would make a personalized email for each and every company. I wasn't just trying to make one general, hey, are you guys hiring kind of email for every company out there. I would go to a company's website and see what they were looking for in a translator. And so I would make a personalized email just for that particular company and send an email to them to show that I was really interested in working for them. And that's what I did for every company that I sent emails for. Eventually I was receiving replies and, asking, oh, hey, can you do this? Can you answer this translation test? And maybe if you pass, you get to work for us. Some of them I failed, but fortunately, some others I passed. And so in 2017, I got hired by a company that was really kind to me, because their translation test, to evaluate my skills in translation, was really fucking hard. And I knew that I didn't have much of a chance to pass that test, but I did it anyway. And they gave me a lot of time to do it. It was like a week, seven full days. And it was a long test as well. But I did the test, and I sent the test to them with the answers and everything, my translation and stuff. And they said to me that I didn't pass the test per se, but they were going to hire me anyway and train me, and give me the feedback that I needed. And I think the reason was because they saw potential. I think somehow they saw potential, even though I wasn't very good. I was in the right track, and all the experience that I had acquired up to that point was all me. I was the one who, studied translation and localization, and even getting better at writing in my own language. This was all me, because I don't have a college degree. I went to college, but I dropped out, and started going through this journey by myself. Just go to YouTube, watch some videos, read articles about what you want to learn, practice. I had to learn how to use professional translation software, and so I would watch YouTube videos. I would download the software. I would, do all of those things. I didn't need anybody to teach me. I Like I said, I don't have a college degree. I did a few translation courses, but they were very basic. I didn't learn a lot doing them. It was just so I could have something on my CV, on my resume. But anyway, going back to topic. And so, this was all me. And they saw potential and they hired me. And so, I started doing translations for them, and they would give me the feedback after that. They review my work and give me feedback. And that feedback was really important to me. I didn't take any of that feedback personally. I just took that feedback as a judgment of my work, not to me as a person, and that was really important for my development as a professional. In a few months, I already knew a lot of things that I needed to do in order to make a good translation. And so the projects that they were sending to me were basically, indie game stuff. Translate this game store page, these set of achievements, this dialogue and stuff like that. Everything related to games. Most of them were indie games. But now I am working for another company. I had the opportunity to work for another one, and I started working on this one in 2018, which is the one that I'm still working for to this day. And most of them are, mobile games and indie games as well. But still, like I said in the beginning of my speech, I plan to localize, AAA titles one day. Even though I really love to play arena shooters and stuff, I still love to work with them. But in a professional way, I want to get there and localize stuff like, the Far Cry games and, a Bethesda title and its software title, Call of Duties and Battlefields and stuff. But yeah, that's how I got to where I am today. It was basically, uh, I was so driven to this world that I would do anything on my own to pursue my passion, to get to where I wanted to be. It was all me, you know. I was basically, had this self-learning kind of mindset.
Yeah,
And
autodidact. I like
yeah,
that word.
yeah. And it worked wonders for me. And I'm not saying that everyone should go this way. I mean, it works and it's fucking awesome to learn things at your own pace. But if you really want to, be in a classroom and everything, I mean, go ahead, man. I'm just saying that if you want to be a video game localizer, you don't need to go to college. I mean, and the reason that I dropped out was because I wasn't learning anything back then on college, and their methodologies are really bad, in my opinion, to make students learn things. And so I was like, I can't do this anymore. I'm, and I just did. My parents, I mean, my dad wasn't happy about that in the beginning. My mom always supported me all the way through. My dad wasn't happy about that, but my mom, put some sense into my dad's head, like saying, hey, he doesn't want to do this, and he can still be successful and stuff, But now he has changed his mind. I mean, he totally supports me with everything that I do. He's really proud of me today because I'm making a living out of this. I am being well paid by doing what I love, what makes me feel fulfilled in this world. So that's all that matters.
What is it about? Maybe was it the way you were raised, or just the people you were around, or what is it about you that makes you kind of a self-driven person? You don't need, like, because you said like you don't need to go to college. I get that, but some people do. Some people require discipline from outside. They require an outward sense of pressure for them to progress, and some people are driven from within. So, what
Mhm.
makes you that kind of guy?
That's a really good question because I think that's just who I am. You
Yeah.
know, I think I know why. I've always been this lonely guy. Most of the time I just spent with myself. In front of the computer and playing games and reading about games. My life is basically about games every single fucking day, and you just you just learn how to do stuff on your own. When when I had problems, with the computer and stuff, I would just Google and fix it and just fix the problems by myself. So I was basically very used to doing that. I mean, just trying to figure things out on your own. And if you don't know how to do something, just Google it, and you will eventually learn. And it's just so satisfying to learn things this way because it's basically on your own pace. You don't have to follow a certain protocol or anything, some bullshit like that. It's it's just so natural. It goes back to that natural way of learning things. You basically learn things by yourself without even fucking realizing it. It has to do with that too. And so I don't know. Of that's just who I am as a person, and it has worked wonders for me because I can speak English. Um, I can talk to people from other parts of the world. I can fucking translate video games and make a living out of it. I can, play games and understand even if they're not localized into my language. I can have access to content on the internet that is not available in my language. I mean, it just opens so many fucking doors to you if you learn a language. And even if you learn other things by yourself, I mean, it just opens so many doors to you. So
Yeah.
that's just who I am and why I love learning things my own way. And it works wonders.
Yeah, you've empowered yourself, and not only have you empowered yourself to have access to stuff that you otherwise wouldn't have, but you've empowered yourself to be able to provide that to other people, which is probably the most beautiful thing about what you do, man.
Thanks, man.
Yeah, no, I wouldn't have you on the show if I didn't think it was worth, noteworthy.
Yeah.
This is really cool stuff that you're doing. It's really, I think, important work. That's a whole market. I mean, we could talk about the humanitarian aspect of, helping people enjoy stuff or making someone's day or whatever, but just the market in general, like you're providing not just, your goal is to hopefully work in the AAA industry one day, but the indie developers that are creating games and the revenue that they're able to then collect that otherwise they wouldn't be able to, because you and the people you work with localize it to your country, which is one of the biggest markets. It actually is the biggest market in your continent, one of the biggest in the world, that
Yeah.
would go overlooked completely, or they would not be able to collect on that market at all without people like you doing what you do. And that's not only are you making a living off of that, but other people are literally making their living because of that.
Yeah. And I'm very fortunate to. Oh, thanks for the kind words, by the way. But I'm very fortunate to work with people that are very competent in this field, and I also learn from them, and I get inspired. I have one colleague who has been doing this kind of thing since 2012. So he's been translating games for 8 years, but he has been a translator since 2007, so 13 years.
Mm.
And he's a very creative guy, and I got really inspired by his work. And I think that inspiration helped me to become a better translator as well. He reviewed a lot of my translations and made them even better than before. He would make most of the changes, like 99% of the changes that he makes to my work, I don't have any fucking complaints, because they were either, little mistakes here and there, or basically, oh no, but this sounds better. Sometimes it's not that your translation was wrong. It's sometimes that it could have sounded better. And then he would go there and change it. And so I was like, oh, yeah, this is way better than before. I agree with that. I agree with most of the changes that he makes to my work. And so I got inspired by that. And today I also work as a reviewer for the company that I work for this company that I'm working for right now. And so and he also agrees with most of the changes. And there's something else, about the localization world in general, is that since we have to translate stuff naturally, there is a side effect of that. Most people won't even realize how much work or how much creativity it requires in order to get to that level of making a translation not sound like one in the first place. And the side effect is most people won't just fucking notice. And I don't blame them for that. And so because of that, we don't get a lot of recognition from people outside of our field, which is kind of unfortunate. And so what I try to do is give people words of encouragement and congratulate them for their work and say, hey man, you're doing a pretty good job. I'm a translator just like my colleagues, but I think that what is really important is for people to get recognized for what they do. And I can see that most of us just don't have that kind of recognition. And that's what I do. When I see a good job, when I see a job well done, I just contact the person directly and say, hey, you did a pretty good job. I am proud of you. And this just, it makes them so happy. You basically made their day by doing that. um and I and yeah, that's what I do.
It's one of those jobs that unfortunately people kind of take for granted. You just expect to see, subtitles where they're needed or whatever it is. And in your case, like it's something that people are only going to really pay a lot of attention to if it's bad. Like if you translate it and the translation is, wonky, and there's like, oh, who would ever say that? Look at these, you call your friend over to the computer. Look at these fucking subtitles, man. This is crazy. Like we've all been in that position, and when it's good, it's just there's no complaints. You don't say anything about it. Nobody's looking up like, hey, who did the translation of this, unless they are someone who's been exposed to the idea that that's something they should pay attention to. So yeah, I think it's really important to kind of, for me, I really wanted to shine a light on not just Brazilian Portuguese, but to the industry of localization across the board, not even just gaming. Like I watched the movie Parasite recently. It's from South Korean film, and the translation from that, from Korean into English, is one of the more difficult transitions you could go through language wise. But as far as I could tell, I mean, absolutely outstanding job from the people who took on that project and made me really be able to like appreciate a wonderful piece of art that there's no way I would have been able to appreciate had it not been translated competently. So yeah, this is so obvious. This is such an obvious thing that I really want more people to pay attention to.
You're doing a pretty good job at it too. I mean, and I totally get what you're saying. I mean, there's a lot of content out there that is not available in English, and like you said, you wouldn't have been able to understand if it wasn't translated in the first place.
Mhm.
Even Japanese games, I can only imagine how hard that must be to localize, Japanese games into English. And the thing about localization is that you adapt content, right? You just don't translate text. Sometimes for example, when you're going to localize a Japanese game into an English speaking audience, you're going to have to change like some cutscenes, some gestures that may
Some
look
ages of
yeah,
character. Yeah.
some ages of characters, some things here and there, so it doesn't look or sound offensive,
Yeah.
because different countries have different sensitivities to that type of content. With Japanese, if you watch a lot of anime, you would see that, hey, there's a lot of controversial content for English speaking countries there.
Sailor Moon's a great example. Like who's this fucker like college guy hanging out with these high school girls, you know, with a rose in his mouth. What's up with this guy? Like
Yeah.
that's like the most obvious thing, and still like the fact that it was translated, it made it so immensely popular despite that major taboo.
Yeah, I can totally understand that. In games, though, they still make a lot of changes to it. I know that the Final Fantasy games had a lot of changes when
Mhm.
they were localized into English, but they still managed to do a pretty good job. I mean, even though I don't speak Japanese, I can see when a game was translated really well. And
Yeah.
for example, Final Fantasy 12, that game is just so well done, not just in terms of the game itself, the gameplay, but also the English localization is just fucking amazing, and even the English dubbing as well, because the game was dubbed in English. And I've played the game, with the English dub and also the original voice actors, speaking Japanese. And by the way, I love watching anime and stuff with the original Japanese voice actors. But in this case, by playing Final Fantasy 12, I prefer the English dubbing more. Not just by how it was translated, but also the acting, in my opinion, was better than the original. But that's just me, that's a very subjective thing. But that still, you can see how much a localization can make a game even better. Um, And a really good example here of localizations well done in our country are the dubbed versions of anime and cartoons and movies and TV series and stuff like that, because those dubbings are pure localization. Like they adapt everything that the characters say in a way that sounds so natural. They use our idioms, our expressions, and our way of talking, and it just feels so Brazilian to watch these shows. And it makes them even funnier than the original, even more fun to watch most of the time. If it's really well done, it becomes better than the original work. And so that's why it's basically really important, which unfortunately a lot of people, like you said, they take it for granted. But I really hope that more people realize that, hey, if it wasn't for us, you would have to learn English first, but now you don't have to. You can spend your time doing other things and just enjoy content in your language because other people took the time to dig into that world and study and work their asses off to do that adaptation for you.
Well, I really appreciate the fact that you do, man. Is there anything else you wanted to kind of crack into before we get out of here?
Maybe like last time, give some shout outs to some people.
Yeah, of course. Shout them out.
So basically, first I want to give shout out to my mom, who has been really supportive in my life. I wouldn't be the kind of person that I am today, and I wouldn't be here actually, even talking to you, because I don't think I would have. I would be like this courageous guy and emotionally smart guy if it wasn't for her. I wouldn't have. I wouldn't be born. I wouldn't be here. So thank you, Mom. I love you so much. And also give a shout out to my colleagues as well, who I have briefly mentioned here. They inspire me. I have the honor to work with very dedicated people who take our job seriously, and so I am very proud of what we do. We are gamers, like everybody else here, and we know how to do a really good job to localize the content into for our country. And I'm actually glad, and I'm also thankful to you for giving me the opportunity to make people understand why this is so important. And so, yeah.
Boa noite. All right, thank you to Maleke for being part of the show and for being an amazing human being and for being part of the Keep and just all that kind of shit. I want to say, just a big thanks to him. Thanks to all of our supporters. You're all absolutely incredible people, and we thank you for shopping through our Amazon link or for being patrons on Patreon or whatever it is that you did. You know what you did. We love you. And also, if you would like to support the show, make sure you go check out the brand new, totally fresh inthekeep.com to learn more. Until next time, stay in the Keep.